In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create this customizable brick wall created with geometry nodes. So this is a Blender product which I have recently released, so if you'd like to purchase the products, then you can find the links to it in the description. So in this video, I'm first going to go over how to use the product and how to control the customizable geometry nodes brick wall, but then the rest of the video will be a tutorial showing you how to create it yourself if you'd like to do that. But if you'd like to help support this channel, then purchasing the Geometry Nodes brick wall is a great way to do that, so I'll have the links to the product in the description. So when you purchase the product, you'll get this Blender file with the Geometry Nodes brick wall. And so the brick wall is added to a curve object, so you can go into edit mode of the curve, and you can select the curve handles, and you can move the curve handles around, and you can rotate the curve handles, and that is going to move the brick wall around. You can also extrude the curve by hitting the E key to extrude the curve, and you can move the curve handles around, and then that will extrude the brick wall out. So the geometry node setup comes with many different customizable values. So the first value here is the material, so you can choose what material you want for the bricks, and I've also created this procedural brick material, which I'll be going over in a moment, but you can choose the material of the object right here. Then we have the brick subsurface, so you can make it higher quality if you want to, and then we also have the brick's edge crease, and so this is basically going to change the bevel of that edge crease on the bricks. Then we also have the brick's height count, so if you want the bricks to be higher up, if you want it to be a really high brick wall, then you can turn up the brick's height count or just keep it smaller. Then we also have the spacing of the bricks, so if you want to make the spacing bigger, then you can drag this out and you can see now there's going to be spacing in between those bricks. Then we also have the brick size, so there's brick size 1, so there's the X, Y, and Z axis, so you can change the size of those bricks, and then also the second one here, so there's the X, Y, and Z values to change the size of those bricks. Then you can also remove bricks with this value, so if you want to make the brick wall looks like it is kind of worn and make some missing bricks, you can turn that up a little bit. And then we also have the bricks random seed, so you can change that to randomize which bricks are removed. And then there is that for the second row of bricks as well, so you can turn up the remove bricks to, and then also the random seed to kind of randomize that. And then there are some random rotation values, so you can turn up these random rotation values by just a small amount, and that is going to randomize the rotation of the bricks. So I just have these turned to a very small amount. And then there's also this random seed for the bricks rotation, so you can see just by changing that random seed, it's kind of randomly rotating the bricks, and it just makes it look a bit more natural. And then on the end here, there are these pillar objects, and so you can choose what object you want here. So for this one here, I have it set to pillars, so it is distributing this pillar object on the end of the curve. Then you also have the pillar scale, so right now I have it set to a 0.9, but you can make it bigger or smaller if you want to. Then we also have the pillars rotation, so you can rotate those pillars. However, you can also just rotate the curve handle, and that'll rotate the pillars. And then you can also subdivide the pillars, so if you want to make them higher detail, you can subdivide them. And then there also is the subsurface value, and there is also the edge crease of those pillars. Then there is also the starting and ending of the pillars, so if you want the pillars to just be at the starting and the ending of the brick wall, you can leave the pillars start and end at 1. If you want to completely remove the pillars, you can turn the start and end values to 0. Or if you want there to be many pillars and you want there to be a pillar at every curve handle, then you can turn both of these values up, and now you can see whenever I extrude this, there's going to be pillars on every single curve handle. Or you can just turn it back down to 1, so turn the values to 1, and now there's just going to be a pillar at the starting and the ending. Now, as well as the geometry nodes being customizable, the material is also customizable as well. So you have this procedural brick material, and we have the overall scale to change the size of the material. Then we also have the noise scale, and then we also have the different colors here, so colors 1, 2, and 3. And then we also have the roughness of the material, and then we also have the bump strength to change the surface of those bricks. So that is how you use my Geometry Nodes customizable brick wall. So again, if you'd like to purchase the product, you can find the links in the description, and that's a great way to help support this channel. But now in the rest of the video, I'm going to be showing you how to create this customizable brick wall yourself. Alright, so here I am in a new scene in Blender, and I'm just going to select everything, and I will hit X and let's delete. So I can now press Shift A, and let's go here to curve, and I'm going to add the normal Bezier curve, and I will zoom into the curve. So let's now go over here to the modifiers, and I'll click on add modifier, and we can add geometry nodes. And then I can click on new here to add new geometry nodes, and I can just call it like brick wall. So you can now click over here to go to the geometry nodes workspace, or if you don't have the geometry nodes workspace, you can click on the little plus here, and then you can go down here to general, and you can just add new geometry nodes. So I just have the 3D viewport right over here, and then the geometry nodes editor right over here. Now I am going to be using the Node Wrangler add-on later in this video, so let's just enable enable it now. So if you don't have the Node Wrangler enabled, you can click on Edit and go to the Preferences, and then over there on the Add-ons tab, just search for Node Wrangler, and you can check mark the Node Wrangler add-on, and I'll show you how to use it in the video. So let's now create a cube, which is going to be the bricks. So I'll press Shift A, and I'll go here to the search, and I'm going to search for a cube. So we're going to add a cube within the geometry nodes. And then what you can do is you can hold down the Shift and Alt key, and then you can select different nodes, and that is going to preview the node in the geometry nodes. Now I want to change the size of the cube. So on the X here, I'm going to turn this up to 2 so that it is longer, and then here on the Y and Z, I'll leave that at 1. So that is a good size for the brick. Now I want to give this cube a subsurf so that it is smoother. So I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the subdivision surface. Let's add the subdivision surface here after the cube, and then I'm going to turn the level up to 4, and then also I'm going to turn the edge crease up to like a 0.6, and by turning up the edge crease, you can see it's basically going to add a bevel there on the edges. And then I also want to shade the object smooth, so I'll go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the set shade smooth, and we'll put that after the subdivision surface. And that is basically it for our brick object. So I'm going to click and drag to box select all 3 of these nodes, and I'm going to press Ctrl J. Ctrl J is going to join them together into a frame, and if you select the frame, you can press F2 to add a label, and I'm just going to call it brick. And this way it'll keep all the nodes nicely organized. So I now want to put this brick onto our curve. So to do that, I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the instance on points node. And let's put the set shade smooth. This is the end of the brick. We are going to put that into the instance of the instance on points, and then I can Shift Alt select the instance on points to preview it. Now I'm going to take this group input and I'm going to drag it up here, and I can bring these down, and I'm going to take this group input geometry and I'm going to put that into the points of the instance on points. So now if I go into edit mode, and if I select the curve handles and move it around, you can see that each curve handle has a brick on it. But I want more bricks, and I want bricks in between the handles. So I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the resample curve. And we're going to put the resample curve here after the group input. So by resampling the curve, now you can see if I drag this out, there are going to be lots of those bricks in between the curve handles. Now I want to make the curve bigger, so go into edit mode of the curve, and you can select everything with the A key, and you can scale this up until it is quite a bit bigger. And so I'm going to hit S to scale, and then I'm going to type in 5 and then enter, so it is 5 times bigger. So I'll go back to object mode now. So now you can see that the bricks aren't overlapping, and so now what I can do is I can turn up this count value, and that is going to add more of those bricks. So I could continue to turn up the count if I want to, but now if I go back into edit mode, and if I move the handle around, you can see that there's going to be less space or more space. And so I want the amount of bricks to change depending on the size of my entire curve. So to do that, I'm going to click on the count here, and I'm going to change the resample curve type to length instead. And so this way it's going to adapt to the size of the curve. So now this length here, I can just turn that to like a 2. I think 2 is pretty good. You can change this depending on the size of your bricks. But now if I move this around, you can see the size is going to adapt depending on the size of your curve. So this way I can have very small curves, and you can see the bricks aren't going to overlap each other, or I can make the curve really big and it's going to add more of those bricks. So it is adapting to the size. Now, when I select a curve handle and when I rotate it, you can see that the bricks are not actually rotating with the handle. So to fix this, I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the align Euler to vector. So I'm going to add this node, and this is going to give us the data for the rotation of the curve handles. And then I also need to press Shift A, go to the search, and I need to search for the curve tangent node. So let's add the curve tangent. I'm going to drop this here, and then I want to put the tangent into the vector. So now let's take these 2 nodes, I'm going to bring them down here, and we can plug the rotation of the align Euler to vector, and we can plug that into the rotation of the instance on points. So these nodes are now controlling the rotation because they're plugged into the rotation of the instance on points, so they're now going to determine the rotation of the bricks. And because we've added the curve tangent, now if I rotate the handles, you can see that the bricks are going to rotate with the rotation of the curve. And then if for some reason the bricks are going in the wrong direction, then you can change the X to Y or Z. So X works well for me, that is the correct rotation, but Y or Z may be good for you. So you can change that to whatever you need. But now you can see the bricks are actually rotating. So I'm going to click and drag to box select these 2 nodes. I'll press Ctrl J to join them together into a frame. And with the frame selected, I will press F2 to give it a label. And I'm going to call this curve rotation. And if you haven't saved your project yet, then you should definitely do that. So you can click on File and you can click on Save and just save the project to your computer. So we now have one nice layer of bricks. However, I want to add more layers of bricks, and then I want to have the bricks offset so that the next layer of bricks is kind of moved over by half a brick. And that way there'll be one brick kind of in here in the middle in between these two bricks. So to do this, I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the mesh line node. And I'm going to put the mesh line over the group input, and then I'll select both of these nodes and I'm going to bring them back a bit. So if I Shift Alt and select this mesh line, you can see this mesh line is just this little black line here, which is coming up. And I can move the start location and the offset if I want to, but I'm going to leave it how it is. And then there's also this count here, and so if I turn up the count, that line is going to get bigger. So what I'll do is distribute the mesh line along the curve, and this is going to make many curves on top of each other. So I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for another instance on points node, and we'll drop this up here. So the mesh line is going to go into the points, and then we want the original group input, which is going to be this curve here. So this curve object here, that is the group input. We are going to put that into the instance. So now that I've done that, you can see the mesh line is going out here and it's going along the curve. And so if I move the curve, that is also going to move those black mesh lines. And then this count here is going to control the amount of lines. So now what I can do is take the instance on points and I can put that into the resample curve instead. And then this resample curve will go into the points. So let's Control Alt and select the instance on points. So now that we have many more mesh lines, we are instancing the cubes not only on the first one, but it's being instanced on all of the other curves. So now if I move this around, you can see we have all these duplicates. So it's almost as if it is arraying this curve up, so there are many more curves above the first one. And if I go to this mesh line, I can change the count to change the size of that brick wall. Now there is a problem, and that is that I want to offset them because right now they are just layered on top of each other, but I want them to be offset. So what we're going to do to fix this is we are going to add more spacing in between each layer of bricks, and then we're going to add more bricks in between the spacing. And then that second layer of bricks, we are going to offset those bricks over so that they are not straight up and down, so that like there's one brick here in the middle, and then there's two bricks here, and then another brick here in the middle. So I'm going to turn this count value to 3 so that there are just 3 layers, but then I'm going to take the mesh line and I'm going to turn this Z value up, and I'm going to turn the Z value to 2. This way there's going to be a nice big space here, and that is just the right size to put another layer of bricks. Let's also click and drag to box select all of these nodes here, so these 3 nodes. I'll press Ctrl J to join them together into a frame. I'll just bring the group input back here. So now we have these 3 nodes here, and these nodes here, I will select the frame. I'll press F2 to add a label, and I'm going to call this curves because these are the nodes which are going to make those extra curves. So now I need to make that other layer of bricks. So what I'm going to do is click and drag to box select all of these nodes here. So not the group output, not the group input, but all the nodes in between. And I'm going to press Control Shift D. So Control Shift D is going to duplicate the nodes, but it'll keep the wires plugged up. So I'll drag this back here and I'll drag this over here. So now we have another duplicate of all the bricks. So now I want to join both of these bricks together. So what I can do is press Shift A, go to the search, and I'm going to search for the join geometry node. Let's put the join geometry here right before the group output, and then I can take this instance on points, put that into the join geometry, and then this instance on points, put that into the join geometry. So now there's basically 2 bricks which are on top of each other. So let's now go down here to the bottom bricks, and we're going to use this bottom brick layer, and we're going to offset the bricks over. So I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the transform geometry node, and let's put that here after the cube. And I can bring these down to give it a bit more space, kind of bring these over, kind of compress that in. So now this transform geometry is after this cube, and so we can use this to transform that layer of bricks. So you can see I can move these bricks on the Y and the X and the Z. So here in the Z translation, I'm going to turn this to 1. And so this is going to bring all of the layers of bricks up by 1. And so now you can see we now have all the bricks filled in. But now I still need to offset them over, so I can use the translation X to do this. So if I drag this over, you can see it's going to offset those bricks. So I'm going to turn the translation X to 1, and now that is going to offset those bricks over. So now you can see I can move the curves around, I can rotate them and scale them, and we now have a nice customizable brick wall. Now I also want to be able to randomly delete some of the bricks to make the brick wall look like it is worn and old. So to do that, I will press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the delete geometry node, and we're going to put the delete geometry after this curves group of nodes. So we'll put this here, and you can see it's deleting all these curves. But I just want to randomly delete some of the bricks. So I'm going to press Shift A, then I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the random value node. And let's put this up here, and we can select these nodes and move them over so we have a bit more space. So let's drag the random value down here, and we want to put the value into the selection, and that way it's going to tell it to randomly delete different bricks. However, you can see this is a gray diamond, and this one is a pink diamond. So we need to click on the float here, and we need to change it to Boolean, and that way it's going to be the same connection. So let's plug the value into the selection, and now you can see it's going to randomly delete some of those bricks. However, there's a problem with this, and that is that instead of deleting random bricks, it is deleting layers of bricks. So to do that, we need to press Shift A, and we need to go to the search, and we need to search for the realize instances node. So we'll drop the realize instances after the resample curve, but before the delete geometry. And so now if I turn up the probability, the random value, it's just randomly gonna grab different bricks and it's gonna delete them. So let's box select these three nodes here. I'll press Ctrl J to join them together into a frame, and I will press F2 to add a label, and I'm gonna rename this to delete random. So these are the nodes which are going to delete the bricks. So I want to delete the other layers of bricks as well. So let's click and drag to box select all of these nodes, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and we're going to put it right down here on the other setup. So let's take the curve, the resample curve, we'll put that into the geometry, and then the delete geometry, we can put that into the points, and then I can drag this down here, so drag the frame down there just to kind of fit it in there. Now sometimes this will happen where it's deleting a bunch of bricks and it kind of looks like some stairs, and that is because of this seed value. So this random value here has a seed, but then the other one has a seed, and if they are the same seed value, then it's actually not going to look very random. So for this random value, we can just turn the seed value up to another value. So I'll just turn the seed value to 1, but then this one up here, we want the seed value to be 0. And so this way, now it looks much more random because the seed values are different. If the seed values are the same, then you can run into some issues. So I'll turn the probability to 0, and also back up here, let's turn the probability to 0 so that we can see all the bricks again. So I now want to add the pillars at the starting and the ending. So I'm going to be modeling the pillars in the 3D viewport. So I'll just go back over here to the layout so I can see this in full screen, and I'll select the brick wall here, and I'll press H to hide it. So I'm now going to press Shift A, and I'll go here to mesh, and I'm going to add a cube. And let's zoom into the cube, and I'm going to go into edit mode. So I'm going to scale this object down on the z-axis, and I'll type in 0.5 and then enter. And then I'm also going to scale it again on the x-axis, and I'll type in 0.5 and then enter. So that is just going to be one of those bricks on the pillar. So I'm now going to press 7 on the numpad to go to top view. And you can see that there are these different grids here in Blender, and so there are smaller grids and larger grids. So I'm going to hit G to grab, and I'll move this brick over, and I'm going to bring it over here so that it's about 2 grids far out and then 2 grids up. So you can see here's one grid, and then here's another one, and then here's one grid and here's another. So I'm just going to stick that right about there. And then I will press Shift D to duplicate, and I'll bring this down on the y-axis, and I'll stick another one there. And then I'll select both of them, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate, and let's bring these over here. So bring it over there. So again, 2 grids out from the center so that it is about an even square size. And then I'll just click here in the corner to select one of the vertices, and then I'll press the L key to select the linked vertices. I'll press Shift D to duplicate, stick it here, and then I can rotate this, and I'll type in 90 and enter, and then I can also scale it down on the x-axis just a little bit, and I'll kind of bring it in here. And then I can press Shift D to duplicate, and I'm going to bring this down here and have another one just like that. So now if I go down here, you can see we have 1 layers of bricks. So I'm going to select everything with the A key, and in edit mode, I will press Shift D to duplicate, and I'll bring them up on the Z-axis and just put another layer of bricks right there. But then to make them look a bit more random and to make the ends not be the same point, I'm going to rotate this. I'll rotate it on the Z-axis, and I'll type in 90 and enter. So now you can see the bricks have some offset. So now I can again press the A key to select all the bricks. I'll press Shift D to duplicate, and I'm going to bring it up on the Z-axis, and then just place it right there. And let me just press Ctrl Z to undo that. So because I did that all in one action by pressing Shift D, then Z, then moving up, and then clicking right there, because I did that all in one action, I can now press Shift R, and Shift R is going to repeat the last action. So I'm going to press Shift R 2 times. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 layers of bricks. And you could have more if you want to, but I think 8 layers is pretty good. So I'm now going to press Shift A, and I'm just going to add another cube in edit mode, and I'm going to bring this cube up on the Z-axis, and then I will scale it and I'll make it much bigger. Let's press 7 on the numpad to go to top view, and I can hold down the Z button and go to wireframe, and I'm going to scale this up so it's just a little bit bigger, so about half a grid. So you can see there's one grid, so this is just about half a grid. And then if I go to front view, I want to scale it down on the Z axis, and I'll make it much thinner. And I'm going to scale this down so it's a little bit bigger than half a grid, and I can bring it down on the Z axis and just stick it right there. So now if I go back to solid view and go back to object mode, you can now see we have that nice brick pillar. So I will now press Alt H, and Alt H is going to unhide the other objects. So I'm now going to select this pillar object, and I'm just going to move it over out of the way. So let's just select the curve again, and I can now go back over here to the geometry node editor. So we can now add the pillars to the edges. So I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the object info node. And if we go here to the object info, we can click right here, and we want to select the cube because the cube is that pillar that we created. So what I'm going to do is drag the group info right down here so that it's kind of in the middle, and then I'm going to box select all these nodes and bring them up so I have a bit more space, and I'm going to add the object info kind of right here in the middle. So what I can do is hold down the Shift and Alt key and then select the object info, and that is going to preview it. So you can see there is our pillar. But I want to do a few things to the pillar. So what I'm going to do is actually go back to the pillar real quick, the actual pillar object, and I'll go into edit mode, and I want to add some loop cuts. So I'll press Control R to add a loop cut, and left click and right click so it stays in the center, and then Control R to add a loop cut, left click and right click so it stays in the center. And why I'm adding this is so that the edges are a bit smoother when we add the subsurf modifier. Alright, so let's go back to the curve and select the curve object, which has the geometry nodes. So now to make the pillar look better, I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search. And I'm going to search for the subdivide mesh, and let's put that after the object info. So this is going to subdivide it just a little bit more. Then I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the subdivision surface, and let's put that after the subdivide mesh. And on the levels here, I'm going to turn this up to 3 so that it is higher quality. And then here on the edge crease, I'm going to turn this up to like a 0.5, and that'll add kind of that bevel there. So now it actually looks like some bricks. Now I also want to shade it smooth, so I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'll search for the set shade smooth, and we'll put that after the subdivision surface as well, so it is smooth. So I'm going to click and drag to box select all of these 4 nodes. I'll press Ctrl J to put them into a frame, and if I click on the frame and press F2 to add a label, I'm going to call it pillars. So I now want to distribute the pillars on the curve. So I'll press Shift A, go to the search here, and I'm going to search for the instance on points. Let's put that here after the set shade smooth, and I'll put it here in the frame. So we can now go over here to the group input, and I'm going to take the geometry and I'm going to put that into the points. Then I want to take this set shade smooth and I want to put that into the instance. And so by doing that, now if I hit the tab key to go into edit mode of the curve, when I move the curve handles around, you can see that it's going to move the pillars around. And if I extrude the curve handles, that is going to add more pillars. So you can see wherever the curve handles are, that is where the pillars are going to be. Now I want to be able to control how many pillars I want, because right here you can see I have 3 curve handles, and so maybe I only want the pillars to be at the starting and the ending, but not in the middle. So to do that, I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'll search for the endpoint selection, and we'll put that in the pillars. So this is going to be the data of all the curve handles. So let's take the selection, and I'm going to put that into the selection of the instance on points. And now if I turn them to 0, you can see there aren't any pillars, but if I turn the start size up to 1, there's just 1 at the starting. If I turn the end size up to 1, there's just 1 at the end. And then if I continue to turn them up, it's going to add more pillars in between the middle of the curve. So I'll just leave the start size and end size to 1 for now. So this is very cool, but the problem is that we can't actually see the brick wall now. So I just need to take the instance on points, I need to plug that up to the join geometry, and then I can Shift Alt and select the join geometry. So now you can see if I select the curve handle and move it around, we have both the pillars and the brick wall. Now another thing that we can do is we can change the size of the pillars. So let's go over here to the pillars, and I can press Shift A and I can go to the search, and I can search for the transform geometry, and let's put that here after the object info. We'll put it here in this frame, and it'll also be before the subdivide mesh. So we can now use this scale value here on the transform geometry, and we can scale all the values at the same time. So you can click on the top one, drag down, and then drag left and right, and that'll change them all at the same time. But I'm going to leave it how it is because I think the scale is a pretty good size, but you can change that scale there if you want to. Now another problem is that when I select the handles and rotate them, the bricks are rotating, but the pillars aren't actually rotating. So I want the pillars to rotate as well. So this is really easy to do. We can just take the same data of the rotation of the curves, and that is this curve rotation, and we can take the align Euler to vector, we can take the rotation, and we can plug that into the instance on points, which is controlling the pillars. So because we want it to control the rotation, we'll put that into the rotation value there, and now because it has that data of the rotation of the curve handles, if I rotate it, you can see the pillars are rotating as well. Now I also want to add a slight random rotation to all of the bricks. So to do that, I'm going to go over here to the curve rotation, and I actually want to give a bit more space here. So I'll click and drag to box select these nodes and just bring them down here so I have a bit more space here. So I'll now press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the rotate Euler node. And let's drop this down here, and I want to put it here inside the curve rotation frame, so stick it in there. And I'm actually going to stick it here in front of the other nodes. So I will drag this over here and put that in front. So I'm going to now take the align Euler to vector, we'll take the rotation, and I'm going to put that into the rotation of the rotate Euler. So we're giving it the data of the curve rotation. And I'm now going to instead replace it for these other inputs here. So let's take the rotate Euler, and we're going to plug the rotation instead into this instance on points rotation. And then also this one right here, this is going into the rotation of this pillars here. So let's take the rotation and I'll put that into this one there. So now if I take this rotate by and rotate it around, you can see it is going to rotate all of those bricks. But instead of rotating all the bricks at once, I want to give the bricks a random rotation. So to do that, I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the random value node. Let's put this here in the curve rotation, and I can take the random value and we're going to put that into the rotate by. So now you can see it's randomly rotating all the bricks. However, I only want them to rotate on the z-axis, so let's click on the float here, and I'm going to change it to vector instead. We'll drag this up here, and I want to put the value into the rotate by again. So this time, because it's turned to vector, we have the x, y, and z values and the x, y, and z values. So I'm going to first turn all the values to 0, but I can now just rotate the bottom ones, so the min and the max, and you can see they're only going to rotate on the z-axis. So I'm going to make these very small numbers. So here on the min, I'm going to change this to a negative 0.05, and then here on this maximum z value, I'm going to turn this to just a 0.05. So now they're going to have a slight rotation. If I click on the random value and press the M key to mute the node, you can see that is the difference. So they're just going to have slight random rotations. All right, and that is pretty much it for the geometry nodes. So I'm now going to be showing you how to add all the different customizable values. So I'm going to drag this side panel out here so I can see it better, so I can see all the customizable values. So the first thing that I want to add is the material, and we're going to be creating the material later in this video, but what I need to do is add a node which will set the material. So I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'll search for the set material node, and we're going to put the set material right here at the very end after this final join geometry. And then I can take this orange dot here, this kind of red dot, and I'm going to drag it all the way over here, over to the group input, and I'm going to plug it here into this top value here. And then if you press the N key to open up the side panel, you can rename this if you want to, but I'm going to leave it as material. So now right here in the customizable geometry node setup, we can choose the material, and we'll be adding the material later. Now I also want to add the brick subsurf. So what I can do is go right up here to the bricks, and we have the subsurf. So let's take the subsurf level, and I can drag this down here and put that into the extra socket, but then I want the other one to be controlled as well at the same time. So we're going to go down here to these bricks, and we're also going to take this subsurface level, and let's drag this over here, and we'll plug that into the same level value. And because they're going into the same level value, this level will control all the bricks at once. So if I drag this level down, you can see it's controlling all the bricks. So then if I double click on this to rename it, I'm going to rename it to bricks subsurf. And then I want to do the same thing for the bricks edge crease. So let's go up here to the subdivision surface, and we have the edge crease. So I'll plot a wire, drag that down here, and we'll stick that into the group input. And I can double click on this to rename it, and I'm going to rename it to bricks edge crease. And then I want to go over here to the bottom one, so these bricks here. Let's take this edge crease from the other bricks, and I can drag this up here, and we'll stick that into the bricks edge crease as well. So now if I go here and control this value, it's controlling it for all the bricks at once. points. And then also, I don't really want this button here. This button is used for other things like vertex painting and other things, but I don't really want it. So on the bricks edge crease, you can click on the single value, and that is going to get rid of that button, and it just makes the customizable geometry nodes look more neat. Now I also want to be able to control the bricks height count to make more layers of bricks. So I'm going to go right up here. We're going to go to the mesh line, and we can take this count value. Let's drag this down here, and we're going to stick it here into the group input. And then I want to do the same thing for the other one. So let's go down here to these curves and this mesh line. We're going to pull out a wire and we're going to drag this into the same exact value. And then if you double click on this to rename it, I'm going to rename it to bricks height count. Now I also want to be able to control the brick spacing. So if we go right over here to this resample curve, we have this length here, and that'll control the spacing. So let's pull out a wire. We can drag this all the way over here and let's stick it into the extra socket. And then I want to do the same thing over here. So let's go over here to the resample curve on the curve here. We'll take the length, we can drag this over here, and we're going to stick it into the same socket so it controls both of them. And then if you click on the length, I also want to turn off the single value to get rid of that button there. And then if I double click on this to rename it, I'm going to rename it to bricks spacing. So now I can just drag the brick spacing here, and you can see it's going to add the spacing for all the bricks. Now I also want to be able to control the brick size. So what I'm going to do is go up here to this top cube, and this cube here, we can take the size, and I'm going to drag this over here and stick it into the bottom socket. And then I can double click on this to rename it here, and I'm going to rename this to bricks 1 size. And then I want to do the same thing over here. So let's go down here and we'll take this cube, we're going to take the size, and I'm going to drag this up here and put it into the extra socket. And then this one, I'm going to rename to bricks 2 size. So now right over here on the custom node group, we can control the size of those bricks. Now I want to be able to remove random bricks. So let's go right up here, and we're going to go over here to the delete random. And you can see there's this probability to randomly delete some of the bricks. So let's take the probability, I can drag this over here, and we're going to stick it into the extra socket here. And I'm going to rename this to remove bricks 1. Then let's go right back up here. We're going to go back up to the delete random, and I also want to be able to control the seed. So let's pull this out here, we'll drag a wire over here, and we'll put this into the extra socket. And I'm going to rename this one to remove bricks seed 1. So then I want to do the exact same thing, but for the other bricks. So let's go down here to the delete random. Let's take this probability, I can drag this up here, put it into the extra socket. And then if I go back over here, we also want to take this seed value, I can drag this one over, and I'll put that into the extra socket as well. So then I can give it the same name. So this here, this probability, this is going to remove bricks 2, and then this remove bricks seed 1, this seed value, I want it to be the same name, but it's going to be remove bricks seed 2. So now I have those different customizable values here, and also I don't really want those extra buttons there, so I'm going to click on each one of these, and I'm going to click on single value just to make it a bit more clean and neat, because we don't really need those values. So I'll turn that off. So now we can remove random bricks just by turning up this value and also this value here, and then we also have the seeds there. Now another thing which I forgot to do is I forgot to take this curve rotation and I forgot to add it to these other bricks, because you can see right here we have this curve rotation, and so this is making the curves rotate. However, I now want to use this one up here, and this one is going to add those random values. So let's take the rotate oiler here, this one has the random value, and we're going to drag this down here, and we're going to replace it here in the rotation, so we're going to replace it for these nodes. And so now if I go back up here to the random value and move this, it's going to rotate all the bricks randomly. So we can now go right back down here to the curve rotation, and we can delete these nodes because we don't actually need them. So now I also do want to be able to control the random values. So these random values here, I want to be able to control them in the custom node group. So what I could do is take the minimum and maximum values and I could plug those up, but I don't want to be able to control the X and Y values because that just makes the brick wall look really weird. I only want to control the Z values. So what I can do is break up the values into 3 different values. So what I'm going to do is press Shift A, and I'll go to the search, and I'll search for the combine XYZ, and let's put this down here. And I can actually drag the curve tangent and the align Euler to vector. I'll drag this up so I have a bit more space, and I will press Shift D to duplicate the combine XYZ. So now we have 2 of them. So I now want to copy all these values over here and then these values over here. And that way it'll break up the values into 3 values instead of just 1. So this one is 0.5. So I'm going to copy this and I'll paste it here. So 0.05. This one is negative 0.05. So I'll paste that into the Z. So now if I take the combine XYZ and put that into the minimum, and also this one here, and put that one into the maximum, we've now broken up the values. So we have the X and the Y and the Z, and we have that for this as well. So what I can do is drag this group input right here, and then I just want to control the Z. So we'll take the Z, we'll put that into the extra socket, and then this Z value, we'll put that into the extra socket. And then if I click on these values, we also want to turn off the single value, and also this Z1 here, turn off that single value, or actually turn it on so it gets rid of that button. So now I want to rename these. So I'm going to double click on this to rename it. And I'm going to rename this one to random rotation min for minimum. And then this one here, I'm going to rename this one to random rotation max. So now if you go down here, let me just make this bigger so you can actually see it a bit better. I'll drag this out so you can look at the bricks here. So I have the random rotation min and the random rotation max to just control that. Now we also have this cool seed value here, and so if I move this around, you can see what the random rotation is actually doing. So let's plug the seed into the extra socket here on the group input, and then if I double click on this to rename it, I'll rename this one to random rotation seed, and then let's also click on that single value there to get rid of that button. Now I also want to be able to control the pillar object if you want to add a different object. So let's go over here to the object info, and we can take this orange dot here and let's plug that into the extra socket, and then I can double click on this and I'm going to rename it to pillar object. So now you can see right down here, we could click on this and we could change it to a different object if we wanted to. Now I also want to be able to control the pillar's scale and the rotation. So let's go back here to this transform geometry here, and we can control the scale and rotation. So let's first take the scale here, let's drag out a wire, and I can drag this into the extra socket here. Now if you go down here, you can see there's an X, Y, and Z value, but I want to control all these values all at once. So let's click on this scale here, and I want to click on the type here, and right now it is set to vector, but I'm going to change it to float instead. And my screencast keys are kind of in the way there, but you can see the type there. I want to change that to float. So float is going to be a one single value. So you can see now here on the scale, it is one value instead of an X, Y, and Z. Now on the default value, I just want to turn that to 1. And then here on the actual scale on the geometry node setup, I want to change that to 1 as well. So now if I drag that scale, it's going to change the size of those pillars. And we can double click on this to rename it, and I'm going to rename it to pillars scale. And then I want to be able to control the rotation of the pillars, but I only want to be able to control the Z-axis. So if I go right over here to the pillar group, you can see there's this transform geometry and there's these rotation values, but I only want to be able to control the Z. I don't want to be able to control the X and Y. That just doesn't make sense. So what I need to do is break up the values just like we did before so we can just control the Z. So I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the combine XYZ, and let's put this down here and stick it into the frame. And then I want to take the vector and I want to put that into the rotation. So I can now drag this up here. So we've now broken up the rotation into Y and X and Z. So we can just take the Z value and we can put that into the extra socket there to control it. And then I want to double click on this to rename it, and I'm going to rename it to pillars rotation. And so now if you go right down here to the customizable geometry node setup, you can rotate this and it's only going to rotate it on the Z axis. Now I also want to be able to control the pillars subdivide and the pillars subsurf. So let's first go here to the pillars and we'll go to the subdivide mesh, and I can take this level here and I'll drag this over and I'll stick it into the extra socket there. And I'll rename this one to pillars subdivide. And then I also want to be able to control the pillars subsurf. So let's go back here to the pillars, and we have this subsurf level. So I'll drag this over here and we're going to stick it into the extra socket here. And then if I double click on this to rename it, I'll rename it to pillars subsurf. And then I want to be able to control the pillar's edge crease. So let's go back here to the subdivision surface, and we have this edge crease. So I'll pull out a wire, drag this all the way over here and stick it into the extra socket. And if I double click on this to rename it, I'll rename it to pillar's edge crease. And then I want to be able to control the pillars starting and ending. So if we go here to the pillars, we have the start size and the end size. So let's drag this over. We'll put that into the extra socket, and then go back here and we'll take the end size and we'll put that into the extra socket as well. And then to to rename these, I'm going to rename this first one here to Pillar Start, and then this last one here, I'm going to rename this to Pillars End. And then also to get rid of those buttons there, I will click on the Pillars Edge Crease and click on Single Value, Pillars Start, and choose single value to get rid of that button, and Pillars End, choose the single value. All right, so now we can drag the Pillar Start up, and just to show you real quick, I'm going to extrude this out many times. So I'll extrude that out many times, so you can see now the brick wall is very long. So if you turn up the Pillar Start, now it's going to add more and more of those pillars wherever there is a curve handle. Or you can just turn it to 1 if you just want 1 at the starting and then also 1 at the end there. All right, so I will press the N key to close the side panel. I'll save this again, and I'm going to go back over here to the layout, and then I can make this a bit bigger so that we can see it. And so there we go. We now have this massive geometry node setup, and we have many different customizable settings. And then of course we can select the handles in edit mode and move them around to move around the brick wall. All right, so we're now going to be creating the material, and we'll also do some lighting and a few other things. So what I'm first going to do is go over here to the render properties, and I'll go down here to color management, and I'm going to be using AGX, which is newly added to Blender 4.0. So I'll choose AGX for the color management, and for the look here, I'll choose high contrast. And then I also want to add some HDRI lighting. So I'm going to click over here on the world properties, and here on the surface, I'm going to click on this yellow dot here to change the type. And instead of color, I want to change this to environment texture, and then I can click on open to open up in HDRI. And I'm going to be adding this Skylit Garage 1K HDRI. So this is a free HDRI from polyhaven.com. Link is in the description if you'd like to download it. And I downloaded the 1K version, and I downloaded the HDR version from Polyhaven. So I'm going to click on that and click on open image. And now if I hold down the Z button and move my mouse up into the render view, we can see some nice lighting. I'm also going to press Shift A, and I'm going to go here to light, and I'm going to add a sunlight, and I'll rotate the sunlight over. And then if I click here to go to the object data properties, I'll turn the strength up to maybe just like a 2 or a 3 so that we have some nice bright lighting. I'm also going to add a camera by pressing Shift A. I will go here and add a camera, and I can move my view to wherever I want the camera to be, and I can press Ctrl Alt Numpad 0 to bring the camera to where I am. And then if I select the camera, I can hit G to grab, and I can double tap the Z key to bring the camera out, and hit G to grab and move it over. And then lastly, I'll just press Shift A, and I'll go here to mesh and add a plane, and I can scale the plane up so that it is very big. And then also I can go here to the bottom, and I'm going to bring the plane down so that the pillars are just resting on the plane. All right, I'll go back to rendered mode, and if I click on the plane, I'm going to click here to add a new material. Let's click on new, and I can just rename this material to ground. And then here on the base color, I'm just going to make this fully black. All right, so I can now select this object here, and let's go over to the shading workspace so that I can add a new material. So let's click on new to add a new material, and I can just rename this to bricks. Now, if I hold down the Z button and move my mouse up into the rendered view, you can see if I take the base color and try to change it, it's not actually affecting the object. That is because we need to go right over here to the modifiers, and we need to click here on the material on the geometry node setup, and we need to add the bricks material that we just created. This way, if I take the base color and change it, now it's actually applied to that object because it's added in the geometry node setup. All right, so we can now create this procedural material. So I'll press Shift A, and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for a noise texture. Let's drop the noise texture here. And then because we turned on the Node Wrangler add-on, I can press Ctrl T with the noise texture selected to add the texture coordinate and mapping. And let's use the object coordinates. So I'll plug the object into the vector, and the object coordinates is going to place the noise texture on the object more evenly. So now let's Ctrl Shift and select the noise texture to preview it on the object. So here on the noise texture scale, I'm just going to turn this to 1, and then let's also take the detail and turn it to the max of 15. And then this roughness here, I will turn it up to like a 0.55. Now there is a problem. If you zoom in here, you can see that the noise texture is the same on all the bricks because it is instancing the bricks. So what I want to do is add a random value so that the noise texture is placed randomly around each brick. So I'll press Shift A, and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the object info node, and let's drop this here. Now we have this random value, and this random value is going to randomly generate from white to black or from 0 to 1. So we can take the random value, and we are going to put that into the location of this mapping. And so this way the mapping is controlling the noise, so the noise is going to be randomly placed for each of the bricks. So now it looks much more random. So then I want to make it more contrasty, so I'll press Shift A, and I'll go to the search, search, I'll search for a color ramp, and we can put the color ramp here after the noise texture. And then I can Control Shift and select the color ramp to preview it. So I can now drag the black tab over and drag the white tab over to make it a bit more contrasty so you can see the texture a bit better. And then I also want to make the custom colors, so I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the mix color node, and let's drop the mix color node down here. So we can now make all of the different custom colors. So I actually want to take the color ramp and I want to put that into the factor, and so now here on A and B we can make the different colors. So here on color B, I'm going to make this kind of a reddish brownish color, and I'll make it a bit darker. And if you want to use the same value that I'm using, you can go here to the hex value and you can punch in 9B, 4C, 3A. So that is the color for color B. And then here on color A, I want to make this darker. So I'm going to make it kind of a reddish orangey color, but then I'm going to make it pretty dark. And if you want to use the exact same color that I'm using, then you can go to the hex value and you can punch in 351810. So that is looking pretty cool. But I also want to add some more nodes, which are going to make the edges a bit brighter so that the bricks look a bit more worn. So I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the geometry node. Let's drop this here. And we have this pointiness value, and this pointiness value is going to make the edges look more bright. Now, a few things to note about the pointiness. The pointiness will not work in the material preview, so if you're in the material preview mode, you're not going to be able to see the pointiness value. And then also, if you're using Blender Eevee, the pointiness value won't work, so you need to make sure you're using the Cycles rendering engine and make sure you're in rendered mode. So I now want to be able to see the pointiness, and I want it to be more contrasty. So I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'll search for another color ramp. And let's just Control Shift and select the color ramp to preview it. Now let's take the pointiness and I'm going to put that into the factor so that we can actually see it. And then I can drag both of these tabs together, and if I drag them really close to each other, you can see it's going to be more contrasty. So now we have the edges of the bricks and we can make that look more worn. However, right now it looks very smooth, and so I want to mix some noise into it to make it look more contrasty. So I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the mix color node, and let's drop it here after the color ramp. And then I want to take the noise texture factor and I'm going to mix this in. So I'll mix it into color A, and then this color ramp color can go into color B. And then in this factor here, I'm going to turn this to like a 0.55. Now right now it's just kind of mixing them together, but I instead want the noise to actually distort the edges of that pointiness value. So I'll click on the mix here, and I'm going to instead change it to the linear light. So now if I drag the factor around, you can see if I drag it to a 0.55, you can see now the edges look really random and noisy. So that is exactly what I want, and it makes it look more random and organic. So I now want to mix that into the color. So I'm going to click on this mix here, which has the colors, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate it and drop it here. So I can now take this original mix and I'm going to put that into color A, and then this linear light result here, which is the pointiness, I can put that into the factor. And so by putting it into the factor, it's going to control where is going to be color A and where is going to be color B. So I can now Control Shift and select the mix to preview it. So now here on color B, I'm just going to make this a little bit of a lighter color. So I'm just going to turn this up so it is a bit lighter. And also, if you want to make that bigger or smaller, you can drag this around here. So you can drag the color ramp and you can make the worn edges bigger or smaller. So I think I'll make them a little bit bigger. So you can see here it is before without the worn edges, and then here it is after. So it really does add a lot to the material. Alright, so I can now drag the material output back here, and I can drag the principled shader over, and I'm going to take the mix result and I'm going to put that into the base color of the principled shader, and I'll Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview it. Now I also want to control the roughness, so we are going to take this noise texture here and we are going to plug the factor into the roughness. So take the factor and put that into the roughness value, and that way some parts are going to be more rough while other parts are going to be more shiny. However, I do want to be able to control the roughness, so I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for a hue saturation value, and we'll put this in between the noise texture and the roughness, and I can drag it down here. So if the values are lighter or darker, that's going to make it more rough or more shiny, so this value here can now control the roughness. So I'm going to turn the value up to a 1.4, and that way all the bricks are going to be a bit more rough. And then I also want to make the bricks more bumpy, so let's take the noise texture factor and I can put that into the normal, but then you can see the shading looks really weird, and that's because I need to convert the black and white noise texture into normal data that the shader can use. So I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'll search for the bump node, and we'll put the bump node in between the noise texture and the normal, and I can drag this down here so that it's better organized. And we actually want to take the noise texture factor and we want to put that into the height value, and that is actually going to convert it to bump data. So now the bricks look really bumpy, but they are way too bumpy. So I can turn this strength down to make it less strong. So I'm going to turn the strength just to 0.3. So now we have a really nice brick material. So I now want to join this together into a custom node group. So I'm going to click and drag to box select all these nodes except the material output, and I'm going to press Ctrl G to join it together into a node group. Now, if you press the tab key with the node group selected, that is going to go in and out of the node group. So I'm going to drag the node group over here. Let's make it a bit bigger. And then if I click here to rename it, I'm going to rename it to bricks. So I'll now hit the tab key to go into the node group, and I will press the N key to open up the side panel. And if you click here on group, you can see we have the different customizable values. So here on the interface, I'm going to double click on this and I'm going to rename it to shader because I like that better. So now we can go over here to the group input and we can add all the values into the group input, and then that way we'll be able to control it outside of the node group. So I first want to control the overall scale. So let's take the scale from this mapping. Let's put that into the extra socket. And then if I click on the scale here, instead of it being 3 values, I just want it to be 1. So let's click on the vector here and I can change it to float instead. And now you can see it's 1 value. And then here on the default value, I need to turn this to 1 so that 1 is the default. But you can see the texture is now missing. So if I go outside of the node group with the tab key, I need to turn the scale back to 1. And now you can see the noise. So let's hit the tab key to go back into the node group. Now I also want to control some of the noise settings. So let's take the noise scale here. We can put that into the extra socket, and also the detail, let's put that into the extra socket, and the roughness, I'll put that into the extra socket. And then if I double click up here to rename these, I want to rename these to noise. So we're going to add noise scale. Let's also rename this one to noise detail. And then this one here, I'm going to rename to noise roughness. And then I want to be able to control the custom colors. So let's drag the group input right over here. And I can take this color here, color A, we'll put that into the extra socket. Color B, we'll put that into the extra socket. And then this color here, we'll put that into the extra socket. And then if I double click on this to rename it, I'll rename it to color 1, and I can also rename this one to color 2. And then I think I'm going to actually rename this to edge color. That's a bit better, so I'll rename it to edge color instead. And then I also want to be able to control the roughness. So this value here is going to make it more rough or more shiny because it's controlling the brightness or darkness. So we'll put the value into the extra socket here. I can double click on this to rename it, and I'll rename it to roughness. And then finally, I want to be able to control the bump strength. So let's take the strength here. I can put that into the extra socket. And if I double click on this to rename it, I'll rename it to bump strength. All right, so we can drag the group input right down here, or maybe just right over here. And I'll press the N key to close the side panel, and I'll hit the tab key to go outside of the node group. And I'll make this a bit bigger. All right, so we can now review the final material. So we have the overall scale, and then the noise scale, and the noise detail, and the noise roughness. And then we also have the different colors here, so color 1 and 2, and then we also have that edge color. Then we have the roughness of the material, and then finally the bump strength. And then of course, if you go right over here, go to the modifiers, and then also select this object here, you can go to the Geometry Nodes brick wall, and you can change many of the different settings. And then of course, if you hit the tab key to go into edit mode of the curve, you can move the curve around and you can rotate it to control the bricks. Alright, so that is it. That is going to wrap it up for this tutorial. So I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you so much for watching. And if you'd like to help support me and this YouTube channel to help me keep on creating these free tutorials, then a great way to do that is by purchasing the finished project files, and you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page, as well as the Blender Market. I'll have all the links in the description. And also checking out my Gumroad store and Patreon page are really great ways to help support the channel. And on my Gumroad store and Patreon page, you can get access to 3D models and assets, tutorial files, artwork project files, procedural materials, and much more content on my Gumroad store and Patreon page. And if you'd like to help support the channel here on YouTube, then you can check out the YouTube memberships by clicking down there on that join button next to the subscribe button. And by joining the YouTube memberships, you'll get some cool perks here on YouTube, and you'll be supporting the channel monthly. And if you enjoyed this video and you'd just like to send me a little tip, you can also use the super thanks feature here on YouTube to send me a little tip underneath this video. So that's going to finish it up for this video, so I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for watching.